Not long ago I did this video on latency settings and whatnot, and I also mentioned in that video that you should be mindful of what sort of instruments you use with your MIDI Guitar 2 software to get the most pleasant experience. I thought I'd list some of the more important properties or make up some sort of criteria for what would be a decent instrument in my book. The instrument should follow your playing actions to a T, of course. If you bend, the instrument should bend. Shouldn't lag, for instance. If it's adding on extra latency, that's not a good plugin. There are good plugins in this way and there are bad plugins. I don't want to list bad plugins because I don't feel it's fair to the developers, because most of the time they don't develop their instruments with MIDI guitar in mind. But I will show you examples of what's a good plugin and what's a bad plugin for MIDI guitar. Not saying that's a bad plugin per se. So the first plugin you saw was MG Nylon. Plays really well, but it lacks in one really important aspect, and that's the bends part. I can't get it to bend. If you look in the top corner of the contact container, you'll see that they have these cog wheels instead of a wrench, which means that they've locked it insofar as I can't go inside and add the possibilities for me to use bends, for instance. Even though that I would say that the MG Nylon is one of the best software nylon string guitars that I've played. Or you can try to play it in the free version as a decent sampler instrument. And the big problems I have with these kinds of instruments are most often the lack of dynamic layers. There's nothing to the details that would indicate I'm striking a harder note. And these might be small details, but they are important to the overall experience. So don't necessarily go for these cheaper ones if you are in the middle of investigating whether or not the MIDI Guitar 2 software is an option for you or not. I advise you to at least try this out. The decent sampler isn't at all a bad container, but it's quite obvious that there is more work that has been done to the one in the contact container. So that's a good instrument to start with for that very reason. Still on the subject of a plugin's playability, and say with a guideline like it being a help and not a hindrance, we're now going to look at piano plugins. And with regard to the last example, it's really important that we look at pianos that have many dynamic layers, because otherwise every mistake you're gonna do is gonna come out on that single layer and it's gonna sound more severe than it actually is. That's why I suggest we look at the Ravenscroft 275 that I normally use, but you can also use Native Instruments Maverick or Modartt Pianoteq, for instance. The first argument for Ravenscroft 275 is obviously the sheer playability. This plugin follows me anywhere. High, low, soft, hard, doesn't matter. It's beautiful everywhere. And the second argument is this possibility for me to use all three pedals on my sustain pedal. Further on to the next plugin. If you need some extra arguments for choosing Pianoteq, look at all the instruments that you can buy from it as in-app purchases. And also look at the wonderful possibility of using external tuning files that you import and retune your whole instrument to whatever crazy tuning you like. So up next, here's the Native Instruments Maverick. Also have a bonus with Ivory 2. That's a perky little piano that I used to use for my chicoria stuff in the beginning. Here I meant to show you plugins that met the playability criteria in terms of not lagging or follow your playing exactly. Left is the bends, and closely associated with that we have vibrato, which is really a function of bends if you think about it. If you can use bends in an instrument, you can also use your personal vibrato that you would use on your guitar for the instrument that you're trying to control. And that gives you sort of a personal connection that I think is unique for these kind of controllers. You have it with like Rolly C boards and stuff like that, but with guitar I think it's even closer. So I'm gonna take you on a detour into the synth world to begin with. So first out we have Noisy from Expressive E, or the guys behind the Touche, you may know it. They also have two other synths, Lie and Imagine, that are very good for MIDI guitar as well. This little device where I layer two instruments and separate them by using the breath controller for, in this case, the saxophone, I've picked up from Michael Brecker, and this kind of naturally leads into the next clip with the UVI OB Legacy synth and the Harmonizer I use for the Brecker chord rotator stuff. The obvious advantages with using a harmonizer is that you get chords moving behind the single lines that you play instead of playing those chords, which is kind of a problem for MIDI guitar sometimes. I'm going to use the same kind of device as I move into the realm of Reason. Earlier Propeller Heads Reason, but nowadays it's Reason Studios. Reason has a lot of devices that work really well for MIDI guitar. One of their standout instruments is their Friktion. Talk about an instrument that follows your playing to a T. The next part is going to be along the same lines. We're talking about a vocoder. And Reason recently dropped a new vocoder called BVX. While still on this subject of vocoders and harmonizers, let's look at the Waves version. In this case, it's kind of special. I have one Waves plugin per string, so actually triggering one string doesn't trigger the same sort of setting in Waves as the next string. So I have this set up with an hexaphonic pickup on my guitar that separates the output into 6 different streams, and I have one harmonizer per string. tie a little ribbon around this chapter of synths and playability and stuff. If you like the idea of having one harmonizer per string, you might want to look at this, where I use one instrument per string instead. Why do you want to use MIDI guitar? Could be a valid question. And I would say because it adds so very much to the actual creation process. You can do things with ease that you otherwise would have to spend days to create. So I wouldn't want you to think that MIDI guitar is going to take over all those chores that you have as a performer, composer, instrumentalist, or whatever. I mean, you might think that you're better at playing guitar than you're at piano, so you should use MIDI guitar software instead. But I mean, it's not going to cover all those cases. But having said that, having knowledge of the software you're going to be working with is key in this case. Very much like the earlier stuff with the harmonizer and with vocoder, I can use another software to bring in voicings in this case. So I'm just playing a melodic line, and I have the Divisimate software in this case breaking this up and playing a lot of voices with whatever kind of orchestra that I'm putting together that I have in my sort of library. In this case, I have the SWAM instruments. The first one was with a trumpet on top, and the other one is with an Alto Sax. This was something that I could have done on my 4-track back in the days. It's only 2 recordings really. I improvised the orchestral part with my MIDI guitar setup first, and then I improvised the trumpet part on top of that later. So that's how easy it is when you know your software. With nothing to hide, what I know, I want you to know. So here's all those plugins and instruments that I think are the best ones. On the top of my list, almost every time I start a session, is the sample modeling either trumpet or the flugelhorn. I mean, I think they're so good instruments. It's funny because they're in this contact container, and usually contact instruments aren't that good at following MIDI guitar. These are. With a breath controller, I would absolutely put them in my best category. Having mentioned Sample modeling, I can't avoid mentioning the audio modeling SWAM instruments. I mean, I use them all, and I use them all the time. I couldn't tell you enough great things about the audio modeling instruments. So I'll show you a clip of all the sort of different audio modeling instruments that I have done something with over the years here. I guess you've realized already that I'm quite fond of wind synths and anything that is controllable via this breath controller. Those instruments are written in a way that usually supports bends really well, and that's not always the case perhaps with instruments that are written for piano. So let me introduce at least two dedicated wind synths. Here's the EVI-NER or EVI-NER from Davidson Audio. The way I like to use them is obviously to add something to this. I'm going to add this Waves Harmonizer that I was talking about earlier. So adding something as easy as a harmonizer may help in fattening the sound or something like this, and you can also make harmonies that change behind it, but it's usually as easy as picking a wind synth preset and perhaps applying some sort of effect on it, and you're done. The other dedicated wind synth I'm interested in is Emox Plus Respiro. Has these lovely breathy qualities, and it's also a breeze to assign something to it. So I'm using it in the next clip in a more experimental way, where I use the bite part of my breath sensor to control noise level and timbre. And those clicking sounds you heard in the beginning takes us into the next category of special forces, or some effects, perhaps. Let's first look at Inoui samples, the stack and slap sax, the baritone. That was where I took the clicking sounds, and those are the key sounds from the baritone that's sampled and put together into this library. In the same way as I describe a harmonizer or a vocoder as a sort of essential addition to the MIDI Guitar 2 setup, I can't deny you outputs portal. It's not an instrument per se. They themselves call it a granular synthesis FX plugin, and it's going to chop out your output and make all kinds of weird stuff with it, but it's musical in all respects. I mean, if you put it on the output of whatever you're playing, it's certainly going to be a musical experience, and it's going to be something you can play against and something unexpected. So it's definitely part of my special forces. Native Instruments Spotlight Series East Asia getting the output portal treatment leads kind of nicely into the world of world instruments. And again, I have a few developers that has sort of focused on wind instruments that I want to showcase. And, let's start with Suonopuro and their Ancient Flutes library. The interesting part is how much difference every note gets from the way you actually play it. So that was a combination patch of SonicCotoure's Gusheng and a piano, I think it's a Maverick, and Suonopuro's new DC. And next we'll have the Sonokinetic UD, and we'll have a combination of the Dr. Chow and the Super Duduk, both from Suonopuro. What kind of walkthrough would this be if we didn't have some sort of software representation of something like this? The erhu, Chinese or Asian violin. We're gonna go back to the Friktion synth in Reason to begin with for their version of this. I'm going to look at another erhu as well, and this comes from Ample Sounds. Ample Sounds is one of those companies that comes out with these super detailed instruments, perfect for solo pieces or duo pieces. And the first Ample Sound instrument that I came across was this wonderful upright bass that I wanted to use for my jazzier stuff at the time. And while still on the subject of upright basses, let me mention Have Audio's Nordisk contrabass as one of my standout basses to use. It's most enjoyable in all its variation. It's got a lot of different articulations, but it suffers unfortunately from being in this contact container, which makes it less than perfect as a performance tool for MIDI guitar. But then again, we can make that work to our advantage instead. If I want to make a Pat Metheny GR300, I wouldn't want to have it super slick and working in all ways. The part where it's kind of unpredictable, it has its charm. So setting up in a contact container might be the best thing for that. On the other hand, while doing my DIY Syntax video a while ago, I learned that control in all areas most of the time is of course the thing we want most. And this is all I'm trying to do with this MIDI guitar project that I've been working on, trying to sort out which of the plugins that actually work this way. I couldn't get them all in this video, of course, but for now I think it's a good representation of what's out there. I'm looking forward to MPE implementation in the future, and there are going to be a lot of other synths to pick up on this list, so hopefully I'll be doing another video on that in the near future. Till then, bye.